dispensations. Well, I told you the Catholic Church has 10,000 saints, but we're a little bit different in the Seventh-day Adventist Church because all those 10,000 saints are dead. In the Seventh-day Adventist Church, we have 22 million saints, and we're all alive. Good morning, saints. I want to start my sermon with two stories. They're related, and you'll see how in a minute. The first is a story that I'm sure you followed because it was the biggest news story in the country at the end of last year, near the end of last year. There was a man by the name of Brian Thompson. He was CEO of one of the largest healthcare companies, United Healthcare. He went to New York City to meet with stockholders and financiers. This is not uncommon. We know New York City is the capital of finance for our country and in many ways for the world. And if you're running a big publicly traded company, you better get to New York once in a while. He was walking back to his hotel after meetings, and a shadowy figure stepped out in a hoodie, a face mask, reached in to his coat, pulled out a gun, and shot Brian in his back. Brian fell face first on the sidewalks in New York City. And that is where he died. The gunman fled out into Central Park and was gone. And people started asking questions. We might think, especially people overseas think that New York City is just a very dangerous place. It's actually the safest large city in the United States. It's safer than Washington, D.C. This kind of thing doesn't happen. It's not that there aren't murders, but they're normally murders. It's normally people, it's a messy business murder, but it tends to be people murder people they know, unfortunately. It's a sad world, but that's the reality. You don't get a lot of people getting murdered by mysterious figures stepping out of the shadows. So people started asking questions. They said, and they looked into Brian's life. His marriage was a little bit difficult. Well, maybe his wife, just saying, you got to look for suspects. Other people said, has this guy been gambling? You know, maybe there's a debt that he hasn't paid. That's what it looked like, right? Well, maybe there was something else going on in Brian's life that got a professional hitman hit on him, and bam, he was gone. The police had a little to go through, but eventually they pieced together pictures. They including one was a little obscure picture of the what they thought might be the gunman's face. But I got to tell you, I looked at that picture. There must be 10,000 people who look like that guy. Yeah, what would I say? You know, sort of dark hair, dark, pointy nose. I mean, there's a lot of people who, when you sort of a side angle picture. I thought, man, that guy, what a joke. They're putting that out. I'm sure that gunman, this guy's a professional. He's probably on a plane to who knows where. Colombia, Moldova, who knows? Could be anywhere in the world. Until a few days later, somebody walked into a McDonald's in Pennsylvania and saw a guy eating a burger and thought, that dude looks like the guy on TV. Now, if it was me, I'd think, that guy looks like the guy on TV. 10,000 people look like that. But not this guy. He called the cops. The cops came. They had a conversation with a guy who ended up being called Luigi, and had a look in his bag, and guess what they found? A gun. A ghost gun. That is a gun that's 3D printed. It's not. And they found a manifesto. And they said, wait a second. We got something for you. A free gift. Handcuffs. And they charged him with first-degree murder. There's a few lessons to learn from this. I'll get to the most important lesson later. The first lesson is, if you do commit the most notorious crime in the country and you get hungry, go through the drive-thru. We'll come back. But when they started looking into who Luigi Maggione is, they got a big surprise. They were expecting a professional hitman or some kind of gang member or something. And it turned out he was a guy from a good family, a wealthy family. He was from Maryland. You don't get better than that. And he'd gone to an Ivy League university and had a very successful career. People were stunned. One of my friends from New York called me up. She's also from Maryland originally. She says, I can't believe it. Did you see they caught the guy who did that terrible crime in New York City? I said, yeah. She says, I'm struggling with this. I said, why? She said, because the guy who did the killing is one of us. What does she mean? She meant people who are well-educated, who are wealthy, who are, because she's well-educated and wealthy and she lives, in a very nice area, just like Luigi did growing up. And they're stunned. How could that happen? We'll get to it in a second. But before we do, I want to tell you another story. It comes from thousands of miles away and decades before. I went to Newbold College in England. That's the Adventist college in England. It's in a beautiful little town or village called Binfield. If you ever get a chance, it's a lovely place to go. And while I was there, somebody came to town. And he stayed off campus, but he went around meeting people, and he said, I've got something new. I have new ideas about prophecy. Come to my apartment and let's study together. But these studies weren't like a normal Bible study. They went late into the night, and they were very, very intense, and they didn't stop. When you finished one night, the next night there were more, and there were all these things, and he'd say, next time I'm going to tell you, it's going to blow your mind. It's going to blow your mind. And I had a friend, I'll call him Jack. And Jack started going to these Bible studies. And one day after another, he got more and more enamored with these Bible studies, to eventually he decided, I can't get enough of this. These guys are leaving town. I am going with them. I'm going all the way overseas, and I'm going to go live with them so I can study the Bible and get these special insights and never, ever come to the end of this amazing, mind-blowing knowledge that these guys have, that my church, my pastor, my teachers are all saying, this is off. So he said, cut those people off. They're the dead. They're gone. Come and live with us and only absorb what we have, and you'll be on the straight and narrow. So that's exactly what Jack did. Cut off from his church, cut off from everything that was familiar, his country, he went and traveled to be in this group. And that's something similar to what happened with Luigi, because he had something else happen 6 months before the killing occurred. He cut off all his contact with his family. He cut off his contact with his friends. He was invited to be part of a wedding, but he didn't respond. And the guy, his friend who was getting married, said, hey, buddy, we know this now because the police found the text. What's going on? Are you coming? You're not? You're going to be like one of my groomsmen, or you're not going to show? Never heard back. It turned out that he just was on his computer getting deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into every rabbit hole on the internet. And somewhere between being a handsome, popular, well-educated young man, he worked his way into becoming a cold-hearted, brutal killer. Some people kind of celebrated when Brian Thompson was killed because he's the head of a health insurance company. They're not very popular. My response to that is, he was also a father. He was a human being. We have ways to sort things out in our society. Taking guns and shooting people on the sidewalk isn't the way. See, what happened with Jack, my friend, who eventually ended up in Texas, in a town in Texas called Waco. And when that compound went up in fire, my friend Jack went up with it. Now, I'm using Jack as a euphemism. He's a very real person, but I don't want to use his actual name for privacy and respect, right? You see, when you disconnect from your broader community and your family and the wisdom that comes from our community, something bad can happen. In fact, something bad often happens. Which brings us to our text this morning, which is a mystery within itself. 2 times in Luke, we're told about Jesus going to the synagogue. I'll read you the second time, Shay read you the first. Then Jesus went to Capernaum. This is Luke 4:31. Then Jesus went to Capernaum, that's a town in Galilee, and he taught there in the synagogue every Sabbath. Have you ever asked yourself why Jesus went to the synagogue every Sabbath? We're told he went to the synagogue in Nazareth, we went to one in Capernaum. Have you ever asked yourself why? Think about Jesus' life and how he was treated. If that was you, would you be showing up? I mean, he knew things were going to go from bad to worse. Why on earth, of all the places you were going to spend time on Sabbath, would you bother to go to a synagogue? Well, I've thought about it quite a lot. The first answer might be, well, the synagogue is where the people are, and Jesus needed to be where the people were. But there's a problem with that analysis. The town of Capernaum, archaeologists tell us, only had about 1,500 people. And they found the synagogue that they believe Jesus went and taught in, the ruins of it. And they think it could fit maybe somewhere between 300 and 500 people. Well, 300 to 500 people is not nobody. That's a crowd, right? But we also know that Jesus spoke to thousands upon thousands of people. In fact, in the same chapter, we're told that he was healing after Sabbath, and people were begging him to stay. Stay. Thousands of people. You can imagine when you heal people, and from a couple times you feed people, and you have teachings that are just so incredibly insightful, well, you can get a crowd. You don't need to go to the synagogue. So Jesus wasn't going to the synagogue every Sabbath to get a crowd. He didn't need that. And you say, well, maybe he needed people. He needed people to be around. No. He had his 12 disciples, and they were just the beginning. He had a multitude of people that followed him around. We know that many women followed him around too. It's a big relative entourage. I guess that's what we'd call it now. A group of people who were traveling. Jesus was never lonely. And of course, he was in constant communion with God, the Father. He didn't go to the synagogue to make friends and have a social life or make connections and any other kind of sort of secular reason that you might drive people. And then the final reason he may have gone to synagogue was maybe he went there to get some spiritual truths. Well, if there's one person in the entire history of the universe, of this world, who did not need to go to somebody's synagogue or church to find out spiritual truths, it was Jesus. He's the author and the finisher. And in fact, what we know from the history of Christ is the synagogue was not the place often to find spiritual food or insight. After thinking about it for some time, I've come to the conclusion that Jesus went to the synagogue on Sabbath for a reason, but none of the reasons that we might normally think of. I believe that Jesus went to the synagogue for the same reason he did a lot of things while he was on earth. He went to the synagogue every Sabbath as an example for you and for me. You know, we've gone through, and I think psychologically and sociologically, we're still recovering from the lockdown during COVID. And many of us during the lockdown, I remember the first Sabbath, I've gone to church every Sabbath, nearly every Sabbath of my entire life, right? From the day I came home from the hospital till today. And I remember the first Sabbath where it was like, hey, you know, you can't go to church, stay home, do something else. Well, it turns out I like painting. Like my guitar playing and singing, I'm not a great painter, but I'm a joyful one. So I said, okay, well, I'll listen to a sermon, then I'll do some painting. And the first day that happened, it was like, oh, this is nice to sort of have time, I suppose. The second Sabbath, well, it wasn't quite as novel. The third Sabbath, the fourth Sabbath, the fifth Sabbath. And this is what I found. I don't know if you found it, but I found that as time went on, my spiritual life suffered. There is nothing quite like meeting together. So why should we reconvene and come here every Sabbath? You know, head elder mentioned that from time to time this church is full, sometimes it's sparsely attended, but why should we come irrespective? Well, I think there's three very good reasons. The first reason why we should come together as a church family is because we need each other for insight, moderation, and growth, spiritual growth. Have you ever been wrong before? Yeah, I have. Have you ever been wrong about something in the spiritual realm? Well, you were quite sure it should be A, and you talked to one of your church members and they said, yeah, you know, I think if you go back and you look at Ezekiel, or if you go over here to Revelation, I don't know if you got that right, James. I've had that happen. And of course, they're always wrong the first time they tell you. Because none of us to say like, oh, yeah. That's not human nature. But there are a lot of things that I've moderated on or gotten deeper knowledge on. Not by going on the internet. The internet's got its use. But there is nothing like having conversations with real people about complex things and thinking them through together as a church family. There is nothing like that. I think if Luigi would have gone together with his friends and said, man, I'm getting so sick of corporate America and these wretched insurance companies, someone's got to do something. My guess is if they just talked about it with 2 or 3 other people, somebody would have said, yeah, we really should. If he said, yeah, I should get a gun and shoot someone, people said, yeah, maybe not. Maybe there's another way we can do this. Have you thought about meeting with your congressman and looking at insurance reform? And maybe that's a better way to go. Or maybe it's better to do protests outside the insurance company to bring light to this. Or maybe there's other ways that you can take what your concerns are and be much more effective and nobody gets killed. Right? That's the wisdom that comes from discussion. It helps us. Just last night I was at a Bible study looking at the book of Daniel. And I got to tell you, one of my friends was taking the Bible study and I learned a few things. Every time I study with other people, I learn a few things. When we keep to ourselves or if we just go online and it's we lack the depth of experience of real people struggling with real issues. And there are a lot of things we don't understand. At least there are a lot of things I don't understand. Even things we don't understand about in the Bible, right? There's things in the Bible that I don't have a clear or easy answer for. Let's work together as a church family. Coming together is the only way to do that in a healthy way. The second reason to come together, and I'm so glad each one of you is here, is that we are living in a time of an epidemic of loneliness. In recent years, about 1 in 2 adults in America reported experiencing loneliness, and that was before the COVID-19 epidemic. It's interesting that the Surgeon General of the United States had this to say. Obviously, it's the previous Surgeon General, but I'm sure the facts don't change. This is what he had to say: loneliness is far more than just a bad feeling. It harms both individuals and societal health. It is associated with a greater risk of cardiovascular disease, dementia, stroke, depression, anxiety, and premature death. The mortality impact of being socially disconnected is similar to that caused by smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I read that and I thought, okay, well, I go to church, so maybe I could take up smoking now. But seriously, coming together is incredibly good for our mental, our physical, and our spiritual health. The final reason I believe we should come together, and this is one of the sad things. We live in a society all around us with lonely people, and we have churches that give community. If you haven't been to one of the fellowship lunches at the church here, I have, and it's great. And the food's not bad either. We got some good cooks in this church. So if you're not planning to come, I hope you'll come next week because it's going to be a lovely experience. One of the reasons why, Lisa, my wife, was talking about what we're doing. One of the reasons that we're doing this is because we know that people are disconnected and looking for community. And we're looking for a way to reach our community. We live in a community that needs us. They just don't know how to connect with us. And we're hoping that by meeting their immediate need, we can build the kind of relationships and trust that are necessary to meet spiritual needs. Ellen White has that saying, only the methods of Christ alone will reach people. That is, he first mingled with people and he met their needs. If we don't meet their needs, they're not going to come. And the need is for activities for children, childcare, absolutely, but it's also for community. And that's the goal. That's the goal. We'll see. Pray for us, and I'll pray for you because we've got to do this as a team. So what else? What other reasons? So the third reason that I think we are called to come to church is that we can do things together that we cannot do alone. You think about it, we're part of a church. I was meeting with members of Congress this last week. That's one of the things that I do. And one of the things I begin with is, hi, I'm working on these particular issues. I come from the Adventist Church, and particularly I'm working with the Adventist Development and Relief Agency. You may have heard there's been some wild stuff going on with foreign aid and development over the last few weeks. I won't bother you with that because that's a whole nother sermon. But you think I should use the other microphone? That's a good idea. I thought my voice would be loud enough that I could do it. Thanks so much, Lisa. So, but there are things that we can do. And one of the ways I introduced the Seventh-day Adventist Church is I said, do you know we're part of a church that runs over 2,000 hospitals and medical clinics around the world. I was just reading a report from the Solomon Islands. I don't know how many of you have been to the Solomon Islands. I have. The former Prime Minister was a Seventh-day Adventist. It's a very strategically important place for a lot of reasons. And one of the beautiful things that the government said in their report was, we're thankful to the Seventh-day Adventist Church because they're running clinics in many remote areas where there's no other health care. We operate over 10,000 schools around the world. Lisa didn't introduce herself when she spoke, but I think some of you know she works at the North American Division and she's in charge in charge is a big word. She's director of elementary education for over 800 elementary schools across the United States and Canada. This is a way that we serve our community, and we have over 150,000 churches. And sometimes people think, oh, we have health care and we've got education. That's how we really give. But churches themselves, we now know there's overwhelming evidence. The spiritual care is essential to human beings. And our churches are not the footnote in what we do. They are the star of what we do. And it's where everything else comes from. I want to conclude with something that is from our church right here in Hyattsville. I was in Australia, that's where I'm from originally, and I gave a sermon at Avondale University, which is our Adventist university over there. And believe it or not, I made reference to Hyattsville Church here, and particularly what I'm going to tell you about now. How many of you have read the plaque in the lobby? There's a bronze plaque. A couple of us have. I was standing in the lobby a few weeks ago now, and I read this plaque, and it really spoke to me. It really spoke to me because it has a statement that's in 1931. The people who built this church, who donated to build this church, who created this endeavor to reach our community had this to say, and it's in bronze letters on the front of, or maybe brass, but in metal letters right there, it says that their hope is for all who worship here to have a missionary zeal. We're inherited their immense sacrifice and work to worship in this beautiful, beautiful church. It's actually one of the most beautiful churches, I think, in the whole Adventist system. And I've seen a lot because I've traveled a lot over the years. I love this church. I love the architecture, and I love the way that where it's located, right in the middle of the community. And I love that we are a church that hasn't lost missionary zeal. My prayer, and by sharing this intergenerational mission as a church family, we can do things that we could never do or even dream to do as individuals. Somebody said this about Protestantism, and it's one of the saddest ideas that I've ever heard. They said, the logical end of Protestantism is we're all just a church on our own. And in Adventism, we tend to have a bit of a problem with this. We split and we split and we split, right? Protestantism generally, but Adventism in particular. There's another split that I heard about just recently. But that's not what we're told to do. We're told to press together. Stay together. Tolerate our differences because we do have differences, and the quirks that irritate us about each other, because sometimes it's the things that irritate us about each other that are the most important to help each one of us grow as a Christian. And who knows, the person or the trait or the idea that we most find alienating might be exactly what's necessary to fulfill God's will within our community. Brothers and sisters, thank you so much for having my family. Thank you so much for your missionary zeal. May we work together to fulfill the vision, not merely of the pioneers of this church, but the mission that God has given all of us. Because I believe time is short. I might be wrong, but I sure believe it. And we're living through some pretty wild times. I believe that this church has a role to play in one of the most important cities in the world to give the gospel and a loud cry